When you look at faith in the world today, it feels like it's being pulled in two totally opposite directions. On one side, you've got this idea of spiritual shopping, creating your own personal beliefs. And on the other, you see a return to some really rigid traditional doctrines. Today, we're going to dive into this incredible story of faith, gender, and what happens when our biggest, grandest beliefs get challenged. So let's kick things off with a question that's actually pretty simple, but really powerful. It's something you might have even noticed yourself. When it comes to faith, is there a gender gap? Well, the data says, yeah, there is. And yeah, the data absolutely backs this up. This chart from the Pew Research Center is pretty clear. In the US, a whopping 86% of women say they have a religious affiliation. For men, that number is 79%. So this isn't just a feeling or a guess. It's a real, measurable thing that sociologists have even given a name, the gender and God gap. Okay, so that naturally leads to the big question, right? Why? What's going on here? In this first part, we're going to dig into some of the theories that try to explain this gap. Well, one of the classic ideas points to something called gender socialization. The thinking here is that, traditional gender roles, which often place women in these caregiver positions, might just line up more neatly with religious values that really emphasize things like love, care, and family. But of course, it's never that simple, is it? For a lot of women, faith is, well, it's a really complicated trade-off. It's a kind of bargain they have to make inside these religious structures that have, historically, been run by men. And this right here gets to the heart of what some feminist thinkers call a patriarchal bargain. On one hand, religion can offer this incredible shelter. It gives you a sense of order, safety, and a powerful feeling of belonging. But there's a flip side, and that's the price. Often, it requires submission to patriarchal control within those very same groups. You're sort of trading your autonomy for that sense of community. So, what happens is, even as women are taking on more and more roles inside religious organizations, they often run into what's been called a stained glass ceiling. It's a lot like the glass ceiling you hear about in the business world. It's this invisible barrier that can stop female clergy from ever reaching the absolute top levels of leadership. But at the same time, something else is going on. Some sociologists are seeing what they call a feminization of religions. This is where the whole vibe starts to shift. God is seen as less of an authoritarian king and more of a loving presence. Clergy are seen as more caring and supportive. It's a move toward values that our culture often connects with femininity. Okay, now we've got to zoom way out because all of this is happening against this huge backdrop of massive cultural change. We're stepping into what's known as postmodernity, and this is a time when the grand, all-encompassing stories that used to define everything, well, they start to fall apart. See, for most of history, religions gave us what sociologists call metanarratives. Think of them like the ultimate instruction manual for reality, a huge story that explained everything from why the world was created to how you should live your life. And a metanarrative isn't just any old story. No, it's a story that claims to be the only true story. It's this all-encompassing explanation for everything, and it doesn't leave a lot of room for other points of view. So what's the core idea of postmodernity? Well, it's this growing skepticism, this deep questioning of those big, grand stories. Whether it was in politics, science, or religion, people just started doubting that any single story could have a total monopoly on the truth. And what happens then? Well, religious symbols start to get watered down. They lose their sacred punch. The philosopher Baudrillard had a great word for this, simulacra, which basically means copies without an original. I mean, think about when a cross becomes just a fashion statement. The symbol's still there, but its deep, original meaning has been kind of hollowed out. It just becomes another accessory for building our personal brand. And all of this leads to another massive shift, the privatization of religion. Basically, as faith loses its public grip, in politics and in schools, it doesn't just vanish. For a lot of people, it just retreats. It moves from the public square into the private space of the home and our own personal beliefs. All right, so here we are in this new world without those big guiding stories. And what we see are two major, and I mean opposing, paths emerging. People either jump into the deep end of choice and variety, or they sprint back towards the safety of absolute certainty. The first path is what people call spiritual shopping, and it's exactly what it sounds like. In a world full of choices, people start acting like consumers of belief. They don't just accept a whole religious package anymore. They pick and mix ideas, practices, and beliefs from all over the place to build a custom spirituality that fits their own life. So, what are they putting in their spiritual shopping cart? Well, it's all about the self, really. They're looking for things like peace of mind, a better self image, physical health, maybe some personal empowerment, or even enlightenment. It's a very personal quest, focused way more on individual well being than on following a community's rules. And you can see the appeal, right? It's what one writer beautifully summed up as God without dogma. It gives you that sense of connection to something bigger, but without all the rigid rules and hierarchies that can sometimes feel, a bit off-putting in organized religion. This whole spiritual marketplace has led to all sorts of new religious movements, or NRMs, and sociologists tend to sort them into three big categories based on how they see the outside world. First, you've got world-rejecting groups, like Heaven's Gate. They're often hostile to mainstream society and have a lot of control over their members. Then there are world-accommodating groups, like Neo-Pentecostalism. These tend to coexist with society, but their focus is on bringing back a sense of spirituality they feel has been lost. And finally, you have world-affirming movements, like the Church of Scientology, which don't tell you to reject the world at all. Instead, they offer to help you unlock your full potential to be successful in it. Okay, so that's one path. Now let's talk about the complete 180-degree opposite reaction. Faced with all this choice and uncertainty of the modern world, some people don't go shopping. They run in the other direction. They run towards absolute certainty, and that's fundamentalism. So what do these fundamentalist movements have in common? Well, there are a few key things. First, they claim they have the one and only truth. Second, they feel like they're under attack from a secular world that's hostile to their beliefs. And finally, they don't just want to control their own members' lives, they often want to impose their strict moral rules on all of society. And a huge reason for this is something called cultural defense. It's pretty straightforward. When a group feels like their whole identity, their traditions, their values, is being threatened by modern culture or globalization, religion can become a kind of shield. It's a source of protection and a powerful way to rally people together. And that right there brings us to the great paradox of religion in our time. You have these two things happening at once. On one hand, faith seems to be declining, retreating into the private sphere for millions of people. But on the other hand, it's being reinvented as a louder, more visible, and sometimes more political source of identity for millions of others. It's somehow disappearing and becoming more important all at the same time. Which leaves us with one final big question to think about. When you look at this whole messy, fascinating picture of decline and reinvention, of spiritual shopping and absolute certainty, you have to wonder, is faith really disappearing from the modern world? Or is it just, changing its address?